Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cycle Breaker Summit. I am Taylor Damiani, your summit host, and I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Shannon Petrovich. Shannon is a therapist, author, and YouTube creator specializing in helping people deal with and heal from narcissistic, abusive, and other toxic relationships. Her book, Out of the Fog into the Clear, Journaling to Help You Heal from Toxic Relationships, has earned a #1 Amazon bestseller status in codependency, self-help from abuse, and personal transformation. Shannon, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Taylor. I'm really excited about this summit.
Me too. I'm so excited to dive into our topic today, which is all about I've left the narcissist. Why do I feel worse?
Yeah.
So let's dive in. A lot of people feel so destroyed by a narcissist that even when they leave, are discarded, or even go no contact, they feel even more overwhelmed or confused or afraid or anxious, depressed, empty, crazy. Why does a person feel like this after being in a relationship with a narcissist?
Yeah, and I think, Taylor, it's part of why people have such a hard time healing and why it takes so long. And people end up kind of starting to heal, then backtracking, even going back to the narcissistic person or abusive person. And we can talk about this in terms of a parent who's narcissistic, or a spouse, or a boyfriend, girlfriend, even an adult child. It can be anybody, even a sibling. I've even worked with people who struggle with a narcissistic sibling. But the problem is that the dynamic of a relationship with a narcissist is so complex and so screwball, for lack of a more clinical term. But we tend to get so lost in it that when we find ourselves free, whether it's of our own doing or somebody else's doing, we actually feel worse. And it's really important to recognize that this is normal. This is a natural reaction to this type of relationship, and severing this type of relationship so that you don't feel crazy and run back or find somebody else to bury yourself in. So really have to notice that this is a different sort of relationship. The abuse and the dynamics and the games are so different and so unique that you need a different and unique ability to understand it and heal from it. That's not obvious, and it's not something that time does not heal all wounds. In fact, sometimes we make ourselves worse by what we choose to do after the relationship ends.
Oh, wow. Yes, yes. So why do we feel even worse? Why, this is so confusing. You would think we would feel better, relieved.
It's because the way the relationship progresses is through a ton of little microaggressions. So if you think about the way one of these relationships starts, and I've fallen prey to them as well. I'm not speaking just from textbooks and 30 years of being a therapist. This happens to everybody. And especially if you're wired to be kind of more empathic, you're bound to have fallen into one of these before and get blindsided by it. So the dynamic of starting the relationship is that there's the love bombing, where they are just, oh, you are the best, you're the most amazing, you're wonderful, you're my person, blah, blah, blah. Then they sink the hook with a lot of other dynamic parts of the relationship, with sort of devaluing and then love bombing, starting to isolate you from your people. So they start to carve you out from the things that matter to you and the people that matter to you, so that they're narrowing and shrinking your world to only them. Then they pour on the good stuff, and then they withdraw again. So there's this give and take and this push-pull that makes you feel more and more hooked in. They typically will become very over-intrusive, and they overshare. Or they may not overshare, but they're definitely intrusive. And sometimes that feels kind of like they want to know me. But if you really step back for a second, say you're getting into a relationship and somebody's coming on hot, coming in hot. I actually talked to a woman who said that she showed up for a first date off of one of the websites, and this guy had a wedding ring
Oh
engagement
my
ring. I'm
God.
like, wow, that's a definition of coming in hot, right? So,
Wow.
so if you back up the bus and you slow things down and you kind of ask for your thoughts, feelings, wants, and needs to be heard, and they don't respect those, or they kind of give you these little microaggressions by pouting or getting irritated or getting upset or saying, well, I guess I don't matter to you as much as I thought I did. All these little things. They're
Mhm,
basically training you to undermine yourself, to put your thoughts, feelings, wants, and needs on the back burner and put
mhm,
theirs on the front.
mhm,
Over
mhm,
time, what that does is it trains you to train yourself to do the same thing.
mm,
So over the course of months or years, you stop noticing what you think or feel. You don't know what you want or need.
mhm.
Literally, like people coming out of these relationships don't know. And
Yeah,
that feels crazy,
yeah.
but it is a normal reaction to this type of relationship. So
Mhm,
don't think you're crazy. Just recognize that the severity of your feelings is indicative of how bad this relationship was for you. If you feel so
mm,
lost, you don't know your thoughts, feelings, wants, and needs anymore, that's
mhm.
bad. So
Yeah.
it takes a whole rebuilding process in order to come back from that. And first of all, you've got to kind of separate from that person. But in those initial parts of separating, you feel worse.
Mm,
The other aspect of it is that these microaggressions or even major aggressions can be triggering of your body's emotional and survival systems. So the fight or flight response gets triggered off, even if it's not like a life-threatening thing. And the people who are good at this are really good at it. So they'll give you just enough to kind of make you step back and kind of catch your breath, but not too
uh-huh.
much that they'll drive you away, right? And
Mm,
so they do these little things that kind of make you go, ooh, I don't want that reaction again. And so
mhm,
it trains you to behave differently, which is a
mm,
horrible thing. You're getting trained to do things differently, but you're also having these trigger responses where we are naturally wired to have a fight or flight response when we feel threatened. And that's a body's response that goes surge of adrenaline and release of that adrenaline.
mhm.
And that, the gazelles do it, the apes do it, like everybody does that, right?
Yeah,
That surge of adrenaline and that release. And that's
yeah.
great if it's when you are in mortal danger. But
Mhm,
if it's all day, every day, because this person keeps triggering you and being like this to you,
mhm,
your body goes into an overdrive and an overabundance of this cortisol buildup.
mhm,
And that leads to depression, anxiety, agitation, and just feeling completely wiped out.
mm.
So
Yeah.
it's the chronic stress of being in this type of relationship that makes you feel horrible. And then if you separate from those little breadcrumbs of love bombing,
Mhm.
now you feel empty.
You may have already touched on this, but I just want to ask, why do people find it so difficult to get free from a narcissistic person?
I think partly because of this dynamic of love bombing and
Mhm,
devaluing
mm,
and breadcrumbs and then withdrawal, so that over time you feel so emptied out and so emotionally, spiritually, sometimes even financially bankrupted that you
mhm,
just don't even have the resources, the emotional resources to stand your ground and get out.
mhm,
When you do, and then you feel worse, then you start to feel crazy and you go back. And so I've seen this in adult children who have the narcissistic parent and they get separated, but then they miss that person, or they feel like that little bit of goodie that they would get once in a blue moon, it was worth
mhm.
all of the abuse and torment. And so
Yeah.
they end up going back in. And it's just tragic because the more you go back, the more destroyed you are, the more torn
Mhm.
down you are. And over
Yeah,
time, you just get completely emptied out.
right. Yeah, it's a devastating cycle. So what do we need to begin to heal?
First of all, really, one of my main messages and why this topic was important to me when you asked me to be on this summit is that I want people to normalize it. It's so awful when you feel like you're the only one in the world that feels this crazy and this destroyed and this bankrupted, when the truth of it is, my YouTube channel gets gazillion, like it's popular, not because I'm any good at it. My videos are total backyard stuff, but
You're being
but
modest.
because people are just starving to death, emotionally speaking,
Yeah.
in terms of really needing to know you're not alone. You didn't create
Mm,
this. This isn't
mhm,
your fault. And your participation in it is no longer required. Like you don't have to keep
mm,
playing this game with them. They
yes.
want you to, and they will want you to as long as you're useful to them, but you don't have to keep playing this game. You are going to feel
Mhm.
worse before you feel better.
Um,
And one of the things too that we need to understand is that we have different parts of our brain. It's called the triune brain if you feel like looking it up. But it's long story short, basically we have that survival mechanism that just does fight or flight. And we
yeah.
have our emotional system, which kind of adds an emotional fight or flight to that too. But then we have our rational mind, and that's our higher cortex. And that's where we reason things out, make good decisions, and make rational choices and logical choices.
Okay.
Turns out when this stuff is all firing off, the emotional and survival brain is firing off, the rational mind takes a break. And it goes offline literally, which is not a good
Mm,
place to try to make decisions from, right?
yeah.
And so I did a video called Follow Your Heart is the worst advice to give somebody who's in a narcissistic relationship,
Ah,
because you do not want to follow your heart. Your heart's going to drag you back in every minute.
wow.
But your wise mind can step back and say, wow, everybody in my life has told me they don't like this person, or this
Hmm.
person's not good for me, or I've gone sort of emotionally downhill since I met this person, or since I'm in relationship with this person.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to look at this more objectively. And then you look at that objectively and make a good decision, and then say to yourself, okay, I'm going to go through this process of separating, going no contact or whatever,
Mhm.
and I'm going to drag my emotions along for the ride. I'm not going to let them pull me
Mm,
back in. And so
mhm,
that separation, that understanding of the different aspects of our brain is super helpful in the process, so that you don't say, oh, well, I must really love that person because I feel really pulled back in.
mhm,
Yeah, you do. You love, they didn't. You feel
mm,
pulled back in, but you don't want your body and mind and soul to go back in that situation.
yeah. How do we begin to do that if we've never done that before?
In my book, I really talk a lot about journaling, and I do, a piece of information, then journal prompts, and then more information, then journal prompts, because when I was doing my YouTube channel solely without the book to dovetail with it, I really felt like these 10 minutes or even 20-minute videos, I couldn't really help person get to where they needed to be. So
Mhm,
in order to really do the work, I offered up this book with journal prompts to help you kind of go, okay, we need to look at this piece, and then we need to really do our own work in the middle of that. Then we need to look at this piece and then do our own work. So part of it is that. And then also, one of the first steps that I work with people on in my coaching program too is that toxic relationship you have with yourself. So
mm,
this is another piece I think people miss and ignore, and it comes back to bite them all the time. If you have a toxic relationship within your own head, which most of us do,
yeah.
we have to fix that first. We really, really do. We
Mm,
have to become our own support system and our own cheerleaders. Because if
mhm.
you're talking to yourself negatively, and I guess psychologists have counted it, it's like 40,000 times a day. If
Wow.
it if that's negative, versus positive, that makes a big difference.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody else in your life is doing that much damage
No
or
way.
healing. So you first have to take care of the internal business, which is really
Oh,
challenging if you come from a home where you
yeah.
created some narratives that were really negative on yourself.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying necessarily mom or dad said A, B, or C. It's how we story whatever happened to us and we create narrative out of whatever happened to us. So
Mm.
we take that narrative with us. And then if every time I feel frustrated, sad, disappointed, hurt, I say, oh, you're such an idiot.
Mhm.
Nobody else can fix that. I have to do that work.
Oh gosh, yeah, we become our own harshest critic.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
imagine that this is one of the things that gets in the way of our healing. I'm curious, are there any other things that get in the way of our healing?
Yeah, there are a lot. One of them is we have to clear out the internal first. And then we have to start fully showing up. That's another thing that I really like to bring up to people. We tend to, and especially as women, but not necessarily just women, we tend to placate, people please,
Mhm.
and peacekeep a lot in our
Yeah.
lives. And when that's our main focus, then we can be cannon fodder. We can be very much vulnerable to those people who would prefer to have us take all the emotional weight in the relationship, right? And do all the
Mhm.
emotional heavy lifting. So
Yeah.
it's super important that we show up fully in every relationship and then see what happens.
Mm.
Sometimes we haven't done that yet, and we haven't given the
Yeah.
relationship its full opportunity to grow. And I've seen this with adult children who have parents that are real toxic. When they show up and say to mom or dad, you know, A, B, C, and D, I'm really angry, I'm hurt, I'm blah, 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 blah. If the
Mhm.
parent can hear that and honor that, you can have a relationship with that person.
Yeah.
And if you've just brushed that stuff under the rug, totally understandable because you've been hurt, but showing up fully. I've also seen marriages and relationships that have been able to be revived because the person said, I won't put up with this any longer. This is my boundary. And when you do A, B, or C, I'm going to hang up or leave or whatever. And
Mhm.
sometimes that person goes, oh, I'm really sorry. That was really selfish of me.
Mhm.
Not always, but you get to show up fully. And
Mm.
even if it doesn't work, you went through the process of facing the hard things. And it gives
Mm.
you confidence and it gives you the ability to face those same issues as they show up in your relationships, which is super crucial,
Mm.
right? So
Yeah.
Bessel van der Kolk in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, talks about the templates. So if your sort of childhood template was as the peacekeeper, the placater, then you're going to bring that with you into relationships in your life.
Yeah.
When you face that stuff and say, no, I'm not that person anymore. That's not my job, not my
Mhm.
role. You got to do your own emotional heavy lifting.
Mhm.
We're much more able to and likely to stand up for ourselves in all our relationships. So
Mm.
I think it's productive to face those things almost always, unless you're unsafe, and then do it by
Mm.
letter. But still do it for yourself, not for the other person, and not to necessarily fix that relationship, just for you.
Mm. So you said showing up fully and shedding these old templates,
Yeah.
these old roles that you've had, that you've played
Yeah.
into. Is there anything else any other strategies? I mean, those are huge strategies that you would add for people who are listening that they can begin to do right now to heal.
Yeah. I think, validating yourself, doing your own internal work with becoming your own friend and supporter. And the way you would talk to a best friend if they were struggling, you're not going to say, you're such an idiot. You would say, you got this, you can do this.
Mm-hmm.
You're a good person. You've tried hard. You've done everything you could. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's time to save you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And then also really recognize that this emotional and survival systems that are on fire, those
Mhm.
are taking your rational mind offline. And in order
Mm.
to heal, we actually have to do some really specific things. And it's a little bit different for everybody, but we have to do specific things to calm that stuff down. It's really interesting. Bessel van der Kolk talks about having a screwed up fire alarm system.
Mm.
And I work with people all the time that say, I'm just anxious and nervous all the time. So it's literally like your fire alarm's going off all the time when you're just going to the grocery store. You're
Yeah,
terrified, you're anxious, you're agitated, all the things.
right.
And then what's really weird is you get with somebody who's not really safe, who really is like a fire,
Uh-huh.
you go into numb. And so we have three options: fight, flight, or freeze. And when we're really terrified, we go into freeze. And so the weird part is that you actually oftentimes feel safer with that abuser than you do out in the world.
Oh,
And that's crazy making, right?
wow.
Yeah. And so that can really hamper your healing if you believe that again have to calm down that stuff so
Yeah.
that you can rationally say, I feel safer with that person who abuses me than I do in the rest of the world. That's
Mhm.
backwards. And that's a normal reaction to a
Uh-huh.
really abusive relationship. And I need to get out. So
Uh-huh.
that's a really important piece too, is to straighten out your fire alarm system so that it goes off when there's danger and it stops going off all the time. And we do that
Mm.
through prayer and meditation and mindfulness. So it's not just woo woo, it's really, that's part of what heals our brains.
Yeah.
Also, the exercise, movement, music, dance, breathing, deep breathing, all the things that we've been told are important, they are scientifically important. They really, really are.
Yeah.
So we have to do that work and we have to do it all day, every day, like not once a week or once a month or whatever. Like we have to get into a practice, even if it's
Mhm.
5 minutes, 3 times a day, everybody
Mhm.
can do something that calms down those emotional fire alarms so that they can
Yes.
function on a more rational way.
Love it. Such helpful information. Shannon, is
Great.
there anything else that you would like to leave our audience with today?
Well, you know, one of the most important things too is that we take the time it takes. And so many people are so destroyed or sad or upset that they bury themselves in another relationship
Mm.
or another numbing agent, drugs or alcohol or anything,
Mhm.
even food. And, we can try so hard to numb out rather than face what we have to face.
Mhm.
But your work and my work is to help people actually go through the healing and actually come out the other side thriving and not just surviving and not just bumping along. You deserve it. Everybody deserves it. A life that's full and rich and happy and joyful, and where you find your people who
Mhm.
care about you and get to know you and really value you.
Beautifully said. So well said. Thank you so much, Shannon. And thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing with us your expertise, your insights. How can people find you?
I have a coaching program called healfromtoxicrelationships.com. And there's some free training video and even a connect with me button if you want to do that, for individual coaching or my small support group coaching. And also on YouTube, Therapist Talks Thrive Beyond Narcissism. And my book is on Amazon. And I have a book site called nofoggydays.com.
Oh, I
So it's
love
out
that.
of the fog into the clear.
What a great name. Well, excellent. Be sure to check that out, everyone. Shannon, again, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Taylor. It's such a joy to be able to participate in such a wonderful and really, really important summit.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you to everyone watching. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the summit.